Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Office Hours podcast. I'm Cisco Cotto, one of the professors in the Pastoral Studies Department at Moody Bible Institute. My guests this week include Caleb MacKenzie, one of the students here at Moody Bible Institute. Hi, Caleb. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Dr. Cotto. Wonderful to be back.
And our guest is Dr. Michael Rydelnik. He is Dean of the Undergraduate School, Moody Bible Institute, Professor of Jewish Studies and Bible. He also hosts Open Line on Moody Radio every Saturday morning. How many stations is it now?
280.
280 stations every Saturday, and also anytime podcast on the Moody Radio app.
Exactly.
I have to get a plug for that.
That's right. Anytime on the Moody Radio app, you can get the podcast on your favorite podcast supplier, or you can just go online and listen at the Moody Radio website.
Yeah, wherever you get your audio.
Exactly. And I'm really glad to be with you.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. We are talking about the discipline of giving. Many people at Moody Bible Institute and the Undergraduate School have been going through Kent Hughes' book, Disciplines of a Godly Man. And one of the disciplines that he talks about in the book is the discipline of giving, the discipline of taking a portion of your financial resources and giving them back to the Lord, giving that portion back to God. Michael, let's begin with, is there any doubt that we need to give? Because this is one of those things that for just about all of us, it's difficult. We kind of push back. Do I really have to do that? Is there any doubt that we do have? We'll talk about how much later, but is there any doubt we have to give?
It says, I think this is a really clear verse, 2 Corinthians 9:7. It's not talking about tithing. That's the law of Moses. It says, each person should do as he has decided in his heart in terms of amount, not reluctantly or out of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. That's 2 Corinthians 9:7. Point being is each person needs to be a giver in some way, somehow, to give financially. That's what this verse is saying. And God is saying you have to decide in your heart and be faithful to it. The real question is, how do we decide? But nevertheless, each person needs to decide how much to give. And so I think everyone needs to give.
Some people could hear that. And I'm not talking about a lower income person. I'm talking about a middle or upper class income person who might go, well, I have decided in my heart to give $5 this month.
That's great.
That's what I'm giving back to the Lord. Is that what Paul's talking about?
No, I think it's so interesting. He talks in that very same passage, 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, the same two chapters. He talks about the church that he's writing about. He said in 2 Corinthians 8, brothers, we want you to know about the grace of God granted to the churches of Macedonia. What made them such great givers? During a severe testing by affliction, their abundance of joy, and here's the key thing, their deep poverty overflowed into the wealth of their generosity. So being poor was not an excuse, and I don't think being wealthy is an excuse. What it is that we have to give out of generosity, which means the point is that there's something sacrificial about it. And it says of the Macedonian churches that they gave according to their ability and beyond their ability. So when we're determining how much we should give, I think that this passage is saying we have to give at least according to our ability or maybe even beyond our ability.
And in the first passage that you brought up in 2 Corinthians 9:7, talking about not reluctantly or under compulsion, can you speak to the heart posture that Paul is getting at? That you're not, reluctantly giving. This is not out of legalism. This is out of love.
Yeah, it's not. Well, this is a command. I have to obey it. I'm kind of annoyed because I really did want to get that new iPhone, or name it, whatever it is, the new car, whatever it is that we want to give.
Nintendo Switch, the OLED. I mean, it's nice.
Yeah,
new Moody Bible Institute merch.
That's right.
Exactly. Whatever it is, but rather saying this is what I want to do. It's a joy. It's a privilege to give to God's work, and that's what he's saying. So when he talks about a cheerful giver. It's something that we do with joy, with generosity, which gives us a positive vibe about our own gift that we're giving.
does the beginning, I guess maybe root issue need to be, we need to understand everything is the Lord's anyway. I mean, I always think of Psalm 24. The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord.
Yeah.
It's all God's stuff anyway. He lets us steward some of it,
Yeah.
right? And maybe we get a little more with our job or our work ethic or whatever. But ultimately, if it's all God's, why do we feel like it's really ours?
Well, I think it's so funny. I think that we maybe give lip service to it being all God's, but we really think it's ours. At least that's my problem. I often thought of my kids when they were little. They'd say to their friends, "Come play at my house," or "Let's."
What a great illustration!
Or, we're going to take our car, like they owned it. Take my car. They couldn't even drive.
How much did you pay for this car?
Yeah, right. My house? You're going to play at my house? It's my house, But you know what? Because they were my children, I never really objected to them saying my house or my car, because it was, in a sense. And I think that's what God does. He says, this is all mine, but, you're my child, and here's what you have to do with it. And the result is that we should generously give it back to him. It should not be any hesitation.
It's a stewardship, right?
Yeah.
Where we're genuinely going, okay, it's God's money. He's given a portion of it to me.
Yeah.
How do I best honor him with this money? And it doesn't mean that you have to live in a tent or something, but how do I best honor him with this money?
Yeah, and one of the best ways to start with is that I think that when we should live by a budget. Just a general budget. Some people have it all written out, Even we had a general mind of what we were going to spend every month for our years and years. But the first thing that we did is, after learning a great lesson, after learning to become givers, the first payment we made every month on our budget was what we gave to God. Right off the top. I think that's a good biblical principle. It's taught in 1 Corinthians 16. On the first day of the week, it says. And also, even in the Old Testament, the principle of first fruit giving. Just give it off the top. The idea is that if we don't give it off the top, what's going to happen is by the end of the week or the month or how often we get paid, but if we wait to we've got left over, what have we got? We got nothing. So
Yeah, and from that first fruits language from the Old Testament, does that also have an aspect of the best? You're giving God the best fruits?
Mm-hmm. Well, that has to do with the sacrifices that we give in the Old Testament. You couldn't have the lame or the blind or the diseased animals. Yeah, let's sacrifice that lamb.
The one that we don't want anyways.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what happened with Cain and Abel. Cain's offering, he gave some of his product, whereas Abel gave the first and the best. So,
Yeah. So when it comes to us deciding how much to give, do we look to the Old Testament as an example? If so, we're going to be given a lot of money.
The Old Testament people think it's a tithing system. It's really a taxing system. And in the Old Testament, in the law of Moses, there was a tithe for the temple. A tithe, that's 10%. People don't even know what a tithe is. It's 10%. 10% for the temple, 10% for the priests and the Levites, and then 10% for the poor over 3 years. So the amount that Israel was to give, according to the law of Moses, was 23 1/3% per year. And then on top of that, there were free will gifts, thank offerings. And so that's a pretty significant amount. I don't know that many of us want to give that. However, some might, if we're doing well enough. That might not be any skin off our nose. That's fine.
And so that's why we almost don't want to get locked into percentages.
Exactly. Well,
Because the
here's
person
what
who
I
makes
think.
$1 million is different than the person who makes 50 in terms of the impact of a percentage.
Exactly. But I think that we should give a percentage, but not necessarily 23 1/3 or 10. I think what the scriptures teach is that Israel had to bring gifts on a regular basis. We need to not necessarily do it once a week, but on a regular basis. We need to decide when we're going to give. It has to be a percentage of our income. That's what we have to determine in our hearts and our minds. How much of a percent am I going to give? Regular, percentage, generous, or sacrificial giving is what I think. When everything I see commended about giving is that there has to be a sacrifice involved, something that we're giving up.
Yeah, I have a wonderful mentor. His name's Mark, and him and his wife give generously to their church, but they also have a small, almost like a personal benevolence fund where they're able to, fund missionaries or help someone out when their car breaks down. What does the Bible have to say about that, or what are some principles?
Well,
that
didn't you ever read the
about
verse? You should only give to tax-exempt organizations and churches.
2 Titus 3:8.
Yeah, that's it.
If they can't give you a receipt, you
Don't
shouldn't
do
be
it.
giving
Don't do it. Yeah. It seems to me that, I have seen teachers here who will help pay for a student's tuition, or not tuition, not Moody, thank God, but their room and board.
Thank the
their
donors
bill.
for that.
Yeah. But they will actually pay for that, or a good portion of it, because the student's in trouble financially and can't come back to school. I've seen faculty do that. They're not doing it for the tax-exempt receipt. They're giving to what is necessary, because you can't get a tax-exempt receipt for that. Even though they could give to Moody, but that wouldn't go toward that student's room and board, so they do that. Or there are times, there was a time in my life where it was a big financial challenge because of various things. And I remember going to do a funeral. I had to go do a funeral, and I had a very dear friend who came with me. And I didn't tell anyone that it was a terrible financial challenge that we were facing, Eva and I. I never would tell a soul about that. But this is the one friend who was praying with me about it. And this is a long time ago. And we went to do this funeral together in Florida. And as I was leaving, we're going back to the airport, he hands me an envelope. And this is so long ago that this was a pretty significant amount of money. There were 5 $100 bills in there. And he just gave it to me. He says, "This is a gift." And I said, "Yeah, no." He says, "No, it's part of my giving." And he just gave it to me. And, that meant some things. That meant a winter coat for my son that year. That meant a number of really important things that I needed to pay for and I didn't have the money for. And I thought, he's given that to God, and it's really a gift to me, but that was what he thought, what the Lord wanted him to do with his money, and he didn't do it for a tax-exempt receipt.
So is there a difference when people start thinking about giving and setting that aside, people who are new to giving? Is there a difference in giving to your church versus giving to a missionary, or giving to a homeless shelter or food pantry, or giving to a neighbor who needs money? Mm-hmm. Can people say, well, I give to this organization, this organization, this organization. There's really nothing left over for my church?
Yeah, well, I think that there are different kinds of people. There's some people who give emotionally. They see a need, they want to give to it. That's why they show commercials with crying children and things like that.
That's right. Yeah, those dogs that limp around.
Yeah, right.
And they have the sad music. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Sarah McLachlan, stop it. Just stop the song now.
My mother would always say, if I give to you at the beginning of the commercial, will you stop the rest of it?
So you know what I mean. But I think when it says each person should give what he has determined, I think it has to be some careful thought. You have to think through what percentage does God want me to give? How much will that be? I really believe that we need to give to our local churches, because we're part of that community. We need to give. Now, there may be something that comes up and we think, I need to give more. I may have to give you more than than I anticipated. That might happen. But also, I personally, I've always really believed in giving to missions. So part of our planning is supporting particular missionaries. And God puts it on our heart. Someone, how many students do I love that came through Moody and they're trying to raise support? I would love to support every one of them, but I can't. But even I pray about it, and we see maybe it might be a one-time gift for one student, regular support for another student as they're going into ministry. But we believe in reserving some of our money for missions, and we also believe in giving to our local church, our local congregation. And then on top of that, I think we have to be ready with some special thank offerings. Someone I know just gave a gift to Moody. She contacted me. She said, I hadn't talked to this person in about, 30 years. I was her pastor at one time in New York, and she said, I just received an inheritance, and I have $25,000 I want to tithe off of $250,000. I'd like to give 10% of this away. Is there a ministry you recommend? And I recommended a certain aspect of Moody Bible Institute. Yeah. And that was unexpected money that she received, and she gave it to a ministry just based on my recommendation. And I'm really grateful that she listened. But so there's different ways. We have to be thoughtful about how we give, generous. But I'm not one. There are times where God touches our hearts we didn't expect to give. But I think part of what even I plan is we plan giving that's not designated so that when that hits, we can give to something like that as part of our budget.
There's money there. You're planning for the unexpected giving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're not heartless. Sometimes God really does say, you should give some money to that. Okay, we'll do it.
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
A lot of pastors don't talk about it. It feels manipulative, and so many pastors, they just shy away from talking about it at all. Is that a good thing for pastors to essentially leave their congregation ignorant about it because they don't want the negative stereotypes to be there? Oh, you're just all about my money. Oh, that's all you want.
Well, when I planted my first congregation, I was pastor of a congregation, then I planted a congregation. And when I planted that one, I had raised support so that I could not, I didn't have a congregation to start with, so I was going to be funded by people not in the congregation so I could go plant this congregation in New York. And I did that, and I was planting it. And then it was going along. We were several years along. They should have been doing much better with their giving, and they were not. They weren't giving. And I went to a conference, and I spoke to this church growth guru after, he was one of the speakers. I spoke to him afterwards. I said, you talked about helping churches grow in terms of their giving. My congregation, this little Messianic congregation, they're just not really good givers. And I was wondering, why do you think that is? And he said to me, well, there's two reasons people don't give to their local congregation. One, they don't trust the pastor. Or two, they haven't been taught. And I thought, well, I'm just going to opt for the second reason. Just no matter what the real reason is, I'm going to presume I have.
Dr. Rydelnik, it was not you.
I thought it may be, but here's the thing about it was he said, you've taught these people as part of their disciplines that they need to be in the Word regularly. You've taught these people to pray. You've taught these people all sorts of spiritual disciplines. He says, have you ever taught about fasting? I said, oh, yeah, I have. He said, as we began to talk about spiritual disciplines, he says, the one discipline you haven't taught these people about because you are shy is about giving. And then he said, what you have done is a disservice to your congregation because they need to give. They need to learn to have greater dependence on God. That's what giving does. It teaches us to depend on the Lord. He said, you've really hurt your congregation. And I went back and I confessed my sin of this congregation of being, of not teaching them what they need to know. I failed them. And I said, I promise you I won't fail you again. I'm going to include teaching about giving just in my plan, just the same way that I include other disciplines in my plan of teaching. And it's amazing how I began to schedule every year, at the start of the year, the first 4 weeks in January were about stewardship, stewarding the money that God gave us, administering it well. And it's amazing how it changed their giving. And people came to me and said, I never knew. Thank you so much.
Yeah, which is opposite. We think, because when I started as a pastor and church planter, it was the same thing for me. I didn't want to talk about it. And I finally decided to bite the bullet, train the people. A young married couple went from giving nothing to giving significantly, and they just said, we never knew this.
Yeah.
We had no idea.
Especially if people come to the Lord.
Yes.
Yeah. They
And we hold back
household
on them.
Yeah.
And we hold back on them because we're afraid of a negative reaction. And what usually often happens is exactly what you're describing. They go, wow, I never knew this.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I remember the first series I did about stewardship, stewarding the money that God has given us and giving back to Him and giving to our congregations and giving to missions and things like that. I said to them, there's two possibilities here. And let me explain it this way. I said, when you go to the doctor, you lay on the table and he starts pressing on your abdomen. And he presses pretty firmly, and sometimes it hurts when the doctor does that. There's two reasons it could hurt. Either there was a problem and the pressure lets him know, oh, there's a problem here. Or he could be pressing too hard. I said to the congregation, I don't know what I've done here. If you think that there's some pain here, there's a tender spot, so to speak, as I'm speaking, it could be either I've pushed too hard, and then I want you to ignore what I've said, or it could be that there's something that was tender there that needed a response, needs to be dealt with. That's what I want you to give. That's what I want you to deal with. I want you to give as a result of that. And it's amazing how I said, I wish I knew if I'd pushed too hard or not. But it's amazing. People really appreciated that they had to judge for themselves whether it was me pushing too hard or if there was a need that they had.
That's really good. And what would you say to people who say that they give not financially, but they give of their time and they open up their home, or things that are not, I don't really want to give my money, but I'll give my time to the church.
Yes, I tithe my time to the church.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I've been asked that many times. I think you should do that too.
It's not one or the other.
No. But I think God wants us to be generous. You can't outgive God. And I think that generosity, financial, you think of the Hall of Fame giver in Scripture, the woman with the 2 pennies, right? What is it that she does? Most people aren't aware of it, but that you go to the temple every day, and if you're poor, they would give you 2 pennies, which would give you an allotment of 2 pieces of bread per day, so you had 2 meals. Well, what she could have done? She could have said, you know what, today I'm going to give 1 penny to God, and I'll sacrifice 1 meal because I'm poor, and I'll tithe the rest of my time to the Lord. Yeah. But she didn't do that. She gave both pennies and decided that one day she's not going to eat, and instead she's going to give it all to the Lord, give it right back to Him. And I think that's the Hall of Fame giver, that we give financially even when we're poverty-stricken. That's what we see here about the Macedonians. They gave out of their poverty. Now, I know that there's some people in debt and they have to get out of debt, but I really would encourage people to find, if it means giving up your Starbucks or your Dunkin' Donuts, or I don't know.
Or your Joe's Coffee. But
Joe's Coffee, yeah.
Don't give up Joe's.
Too convicting.
That's the coffee house in Moody Bible Institute.
I always think that's funny that
Joe's.
Students think that I don't have the money to give, and then I see them up in Joe's. I think, okay. So
we are, and I guess I don't want to go off on this, but we are so incredibly. If you're listening to this in the United States, we're so incredibly privileged.
Oh, sure.
And the things that
We're so affluent.
I mean,
With
we
my
really
AirPods
are.
in, I'm
Yes.
listening on my $2,000 MacBook Pro
Yes.
in my house that I drove my $20,000 car to be at. And
But these
air
things have
conditioned,
become
heated.
the norm to the point where it seems like, no, this is what I'm supposed to have.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I get something else, then I've gone above and beyond.
Yeah, I think that we learn to give from the earliest days. Now, I wasn't always the best giver. I'll freely confess, God uses various things to teach us. I was a sporadic giver, not regular or percentage. As things came along and I had some money, I would give it away. And then I was pastoring my first congregation, and I was preaching through the book of Malachi. I think it was the second or third series that I did in that congregation, preaching through Malachi, and I came to the passage about bring it all into the storehouse,
Mm-hmm.
Don't rob God. And I'm like, oh man, I'm not doing this. I am the one that this prophet is rebuking right here. That's me. And
But that's Old Testament, Dr.
Yeah.
That's Old Testament. We're New Testament.
you're good. You don't have to worry about that.
thank God I can keep all my money.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
And so I really made a commitment to the Lord. And I actually, when I was talking to my congregation as I preached through it, I said to those dear people, I said, I've not been this passage is speaking to me as much as it might be speaking to you. And I've made a commitment with my wife that we're going to become regular percentage givers, because we have the New Testament too, which tells us not about tithing, but generous, sacrificial giving.
Yeah, and that's encouraging to know as a student and a young person, and for other new Christians or other young people listening who might be thinking, "Oh my gosh, I've never heard of this." It's like you can start now.
Yeah, that's right.
You don't have to continue like this, and you can see how God blesses you through this, and how it's more blessed to give than to receive.
Yeah. And listen, Dr. Cotto knows. You don't want to preach something that you're not living.
Oh,
That's the
stand
pits.
up there, fake.
Yeah.
You need to do this.
Yeah.
I'm not
And
doing
that, that was like a kick in the head for me, that passage in Malachi. And as a result of that, that was a long time ago. I'll tell you how long ago that was. That was in 1983. So, but it changed our lives in terms of giving. And there are a lot of people that will tell you, in my experience, that we can give. People think you give too much. I don't think we can give too much. I do think that we have to be sane. You got to pay your bills. You got to do what you have to do. You got to care for your family. But when God wants you to give, I think even when we're not rolling in dough, we can still give something.
When Anna and I got married, we decided just prayerfully, we're going to do 10% off the top before taxes, whatever. 10% right off the top. We're going to get a separate bank account. We're going to have it automatically deducted to go into that bank account, so there's no chance that in any way the money gets lost on some other bill or whatever. And over the years, what we've changed is instead of it going to a separate bank account now, because everything's electronic, it just automatically goes to the church, like right away.
Boom.
First and 15th, automatically. And in spite of that, as our income goes up, the amount goes up. And we've never gone without. There's never been, we can't eat because we give 10% off the top. And then there's other giving. There's missionary giving and and different things too. But the gift to the church, the first and the 15th, is 10% off the top, and it has been for 20 years. And there's never been a point where we've gone, I can't pay the mortgage because I gave this money to God.
Now, I'm not big on tithing.
Yeah, right.
But,
whatever it is. For us, it was 10%.
I think
off the
10%
top.
is great. By the way, and I think there was one pastor who used to teach all the time that first 10% goes to God, now, or whatever percentage you decide, and then the second 10% goes in your savings account because you need to save for a rainy day, and then live on the 80% and make your budget based on the 80%. I found that to be both those things, giving off the top and the savings. That's a really valuable way of using your money. People are like, well, how did you save this money? Well, I didn't even notice it, just like you, right? It just goes automatically to the savings. It's remarkable how you learn to live on what you have.
That's right.
So, yeah. I
So
think that works.
to that, the automatic giving here, and we'll make this the last question. This is really practical because some people wonder about this. Do I have to, those of us who still have checkbooks, do I have to bring a check to church on Sunday morning? Do I have to bring cash on Sunday morning? Can I give electronically? Can I give automated? Does that depersonalize it? It doesn't feel like a sacrifice. Does it matter how I give, or is it that I give?
Let me compare it to reading the Scriptures. I always tell people the reason they don't read the Scriptures regularly is because they're looking to have their central nervous system tickled every time they read the Bible. And what we ought to do is read the Bible out of routine faithfulness. It seems to me that routine faithfulness would say the best way to handle giving is to put it right into the account automatically and have it go right where it's supposed to go automatically. It's not depersonalizing what it is. It's making giving part of our routine faithfulness. I think that's what faithfulness ought to be, something that just happens.
Well, the big companies figured this out. Netflix, Disney Plus, all them. Every month we're going to ding that credit card because we know that it's automatic, and then it's there, and you don't even think about it anymore. And it's if Netflix can do it, why can't we do that for the Lord?
And I think it just makes a lot. Listen, my son is on my. He's a fully grown adult, but we're on a family plan with our iPhone.
Yeah,
and he shares. He gives his monthly amount, and he wanted to do it personally, and he was really irregular.
If my dad is listening, that's our car insurance for my other siblings.
And I said, hey, why don't you just do it as an automatic monthly gift? And he said, well, that's a good idea. Yeah, it really is.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. If we could do that.
It's not that you're trying to cheat God. It's that you might forget,
You forget all the time.
Right.
And so routine faithfulness, I think planned giving, put it in the account.
You have a schedule for your Bible reading. You have a routine where you get up and you read your Bible every morning. Why not schedule when you give?
You don't just read when you feel like it.
Yeah.
That's it. So
and speaking of planned giving, have a will too. That's a whole nother podcast.
Oh, that's another discussion.
Have a will, have an estate plan. Yeah. Support the Lord even after you're with Him.
Yeah.
Support the Lord.
That's great.
Caleb MacKenzie, Dr. Michael Rydelnik, thanks so much. Really great conversation.
I enjoyed it. Thanks.
And thanks to you.
To be here.
Thanks to you for joining us on the Office Hours podcast.